CS50A Web Development 1 Midterm Project. There will be 4 pages in your midterm project, and in this week the new changes are related to the About and Credits page. The main thing I want to review with you on this page is how your project should fit together. You should make sure to have a root folder for this assignment, and that root folder will be called Module 8, as you'll see later in the instructions. The important thing to remember is that you're using HTML5 and CSS3 to create your website. The other thing that you want to keep in mind for this week's addition to the midterm project is that you're going to be adding CSS properties and rules to apply a consistent color palette of at least 3 colors to the page elements in all 4 pages of your project. And all of those stylistic elements are going to be coming through your CSS properties in a single external style sheet. I'm looking at the specific instructions for this week, and there are a couple of things I want to point out. Number 1, you want to make sure that you're creating a color palette of at least 3 colors using a known selection method based on color theory and the color wheel. If you're confused about what that means, remember the last time we had class I showed you a variety of color picker websites. Here's an example of one, the Peloton color scheme. For example, the adjacent color scheme. If we were focusing on green, then you can see you can move the adjacent colors around a little bit, and you can reduce the amount of saturation, increasing the amount of lightness or darkness, and then generate an example of what that type of page would look like. And once you have that page generated, you can then start exporting your color schemes very easily. So make sure that you use those resources for determining the color theory that you're going to be applying. In addition, you want to modify or create at least 6 custom rules using color properties. And here are some examples. One thing I do want to mention, no inline styles. All of this should be through your external style sheet. External CSS file is the key for this. Use the following CSS property in some of your rules: color, which refers to text, background color, border color, and make sure that within your CSS rule file that you are having class-based rules, ID-based rules, descendant rules, and make sure that your website has all 4 of these pages. And let's talk specifically about this page, the credit about page. It should be at least 100 words and 2 or more paragraphs describing the following: a brief introduction of you, a summary of what was most challenging in the completion of this midterm, a summary of what you found most surprising about the subject of your midterm. Make sure that you validate your pages. Make sure that you include with your homework a screenshot of the validation confirmation. Nevertheless, I will be checking all of the pages using my handy-dandy validator that I have installed inside of my Chrome web browser. I'm inside of brackets, and you can see I have my Module 8, which was a copy of all of my content in Module 7, and in addition, my About page. You will also see that I have an Assets folder for my images and my videos and my audio files. I have a Font folder because one of my requirements for this assignment was to use web fonts. And I also have my Styles folder where I have my style sheet. When I open up my style sheet, you'll notice how I have made comments throughout my style sheet. For example, this line 3 where it says web fonts, and I list all of the fonts that I've installed and uploaded to the web. I then list my element selectors. Those are also known as tag selectors. Then I list my multiple tag selectors where I have multiple tags applying to the same, having the same properties and values applying to multiple tags. Each tag is separated by a comma. Then I have descendant tag selectors. Now in this case, nav is not a descendant tag selector, so this should be moved. So we'll move that. Oopsie, I left the closing bracket there. Let's take that and move it up to our tag selectors. And I'm going to place it right in here because contextually that's the best place for it to go. It's one of the larger elements that happens near the top of the page. Now going back down to our descendant tag selectors, I'll get rid of a couple of extra lines here, and we see when list item descends from unordered list within navigation, these properties will apply. So that's how descendant tag selectors work. Then we see our ID selectors, they always start with a pound sign. We see our class selectors, they always start with a dot. And then finally, that takes us to the end of our style sheet. I'll go File Save just because I made a few little changes there. Then I'm going to open up my index page, and we'll see inside of my index page I am accessing a variety of those descendant selectors and classes and various other styles from my style sheet. As we can see here, I'm accessing a class here, and actually in this case you'll see, I'll make this a little wider so you can see, I've got two classes applying to the same tag. You can apply multiple classes to the same tag simply by separating them with a space. I'm recording this at a little bit of a later time, but I do want to show you one last thing before we examine the entire website live, and that is the requirement for creating a background image. So I'm going to fade out from here and go to an earlier video which displays the process of creating a background image and using it in your style sheet and having that display on your website. The first thing you need to do is decide on the theme for your project. So since my project is about Arctic foxes, I typed into Google web page background winter, and then I clicked on the images tab. You want to find something very simple because a background is supposed to be in the background and kind of barely visible. So when I look through all of the image choices I have to go for something that's not going to be too busy and distract the user. So I've decided on my background image. We see it right over here, and I just want to point out that based on the fair use doctrine, you're able to use a variety of images for educational purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now right click on this image and open the link in a new tab. Whoopsie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this image and I'm going to open the image in a new tab, and we see here's my image, and then I'm going to save this image into my folder in Module 8 where my assets are. As you can see, I already saved it there. Now I'm going to open this up in Photoshop, and as you'll see here in my history, I have selected the text, and I just deleted it and converted it to the background fill. So that's an easy process to do, and now I can go File, Export. But before I do that, even though this is a pretty basic image, I want to reduce the transparency even further. So I want to make sure to do that. In this case, in order to reduce the transparency, it cannot be a background layer. So I'll double click on that layer and just turn it into a regular layer. And then I can reduce the opacity to maybe about 50%. And that's really the type of thing that I want to do. So at this point, I can go File, Export as Ping, and I'll export it into my folder here. And that's my image, and I'll replace the one that's already there. So using a background image at a lower transparency is really the best approach for your transparency. Now, so using a background image with a reduced level of opacity is really the best idea for a background image. So now that I've done that, I'm going to exit out of Photoshop and go back in to brackets. So now I'm back inside of brackets, and I got my style sheet open. As you can see, I've got my web fonts in there, I've got my RGB codes as according to the work that I did on Peloton, and I've got a background color for my page. As you can see, I've applied that to the HTML tag. So you'll see that on my page, because we've kind of got a wintry feel to it, we have a cool blue, and we see that that cool blue applies to all of our pages. And we also have a background image right over here. I'm using a background image placement for my logo. But what I'm going to show you is that you can have multiple background images on the same page. We're not going to have to deal with that logo background image. It's the same approach, but I'm going to apply a background image to the entire page, and because of the fact that I knocked down the opacity of that, it's not going to be too intrusive. So we can see this is what it looks like without a background image for the page. Now let's go into brackets and apply the code that we need to get a background image to work. There are many elements of the background image protocols, so we're just going to use the 4 that I find most important to use. Of course, the first one is going to be background image, and you want to point to that image by using the URL and then using the path to that URL. In my case, because of the fact that the styles file is in the styles folder and the background image is in the assets folder, I have to go up one directory and find the assets folder, and once I find that, inside of there I will find there's an image called background.png, and we see that selected right here, and if I roll my cursor over this I can get a screenshot of that so I can see what my image looks like, and I can even see there's some transparency to that. I'll put a semicolon at the end of that. Now we're going to add the fact that we do not want this background to repeat. So I'll type in background, and then I'll scroll down to repeat, and I'll say no repeat, semicolon. Now, background position and background size. So I'm going to type in background position, and we'll see there are a lot of different ways to position it, from the bottom, from the center, from the left to the right. I like to use center. And finally, we're going to use background size. Background size has a new feature with cover that really makes using background images a really fun and easy thing to do. So now that I've saved all of this and I choose File, Save All, I can go back to my index page and I can preview that by choosing Live Preview. And now we see our background image is really not intrusive at all. If I wanted to adjust it so it was even less intrusive, I would most likely go into Photoshop to do that.